The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the rubble-strewn streets of New Jakarta. Arya picked her way carefully through the debris, her eyes darting back and forth as she scanned for any sign of trouble. She knew the risks of being out after curfew, but she had no choice. Her family needed food, and the Zorjan-controlled ration centers were the only source. As she approached the checkpoint, Arya felt a familiar sense of dread wash over her. The Zorjan guards, with their sleek armor and cold, reptilian eyes, seemed to take pleasure in tormenting the humans who came to them for aid. She steeled herself as she stepped forward, her identity chip clutched tightly in her hand. Name and identification, the guard barked, his voice tinged with contempt. Arya Nakamura, ID number 7845 Beta, Arya replied, holding out her chip. The guard snatched it from her hand and scanned it with his omniscanner, his eyes narrowing as he studied the readout. "You're late," Humani snarled, tossing the chip back at her. "Rations have already been distributed for the day." Arya felt a surge of anger rise up within her, but she fought it back down. She knew that arguing with the guards was a futile and dangerous proposition. Instead, she simply nodded and turned to leave, her heart heavy with the knowledge that her family would go hungry tonight. As she walked back through the streets of New Jakarta, Arya couldn't help but feel a sense of despair wash over her. It had been 5 years since the Zorjans had invaded, and in that time they had crushed any sense of hope or resistance among the human population. The once proud colony had been reduced to a shell of its former self, its people little more than slaves to their alien overlords. But even in the midst of her despair, Arya couldn't shake the feeling that something had to change. She had heard whispers of a resistance movement, of humans who were fighting back against the Zorjans. She had always dismissed such talk as wishful thinking, but now, as she walked through the ruins of her hometown, she couldn't help but wonder if there might be some truth to the rumors. As she turned the corner onto her street, Arya suddenly found herself face to face with a figure cloaked in shadow. She gasped and stumbled backward, her heart racing with fear. But as the figure stepped forward into the light, she realized that it was not a Zorjan, but a man with a grizzled face and piercing blue eyes. "Arya Nakamura," the man said, his voice low and urgent. "I've been looking for you. I have a proposition that I think you'll want to hear." Arya hesitated for a moment, her mind racing with possibilities. Could this be the resistance she had heard whispers about, or was it simply another trap set by the Zorjans to ensnare rebellious humans? But as she looked into the man's eyes, she saw something there that she had not seen in a long time: hope. And in that moment, she knew that she had to take the chance. "I'm listening," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "What do you have in mind?" The man smiled, a fierce and determined expression that sent a shiver down Arya's spine. "Come with me," he said, holding out his hand, "and I'll show you how we're going to take back our world." Arya followed the man through a labyrinth of back alleys and abandoned buildings, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and excitement. She knew that she was taking a huge risk by trusting this stranger, but something about him made her believe that he was telling the truth about the resistance. As they walked, the man introduced himself as Marcus, a former soldier who had been part of the colony's defense force before the Zorjan invasion. He told Arya that he had been part of the resistance from the beginning, working to undermine the Zorjans' control and protect the human population. "We've been biding our time," Marcus explained as they ducked into a ruined warehouse, building our strength, gathering resources, waiting for the right moment to strike. Inside the warehouse, Arya found herself surrounded by a group of humans, all armed and wearing expressions of grim determination. She recognized some of them from her neighborhood, but others were complete strangers. "Welcome to the resistance," Marcus said, gesturing to the assembled group. "These are the people who are going to help us take back our world." Arya looked around at the faces of her fellow resistance members, feeling a sense of awe and inspiration wash over her. These were people who had chosen to fight back against the Zorjans, despite the overwhelming odds against them. They were heroes, in every sense of the word. Over the next few days, Arya began to learn the ways of the resistance. She trained in hand-to-hand combat and learned how to use the various weapons that the group had managed to scavenge or steal from the Zorjans. She also learned about the group's larger strategy to strike at key Zorjan targets and infrastructure, weakening their grip on the colony and inspiring other humans to join the fight. As she trained and planned with her fellow resistance members, Arya couldn't help but feel a sense of purpose and belonging that she had never experienced before. For the first time in years, she felt like she was part of something bigger than herself, a movement that could actually make a difference in the world. But even as she threw herself into her new life as a resistance fighter, Arya knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult. The Zorgians were a powerful and ruthless enemy, and they would not give up their control of the colony without a fight. As she lay in her bunk at night, listening to the sounds of her fellow resistance members sleeping around her, Arya couldn't help but feel a sense of trepidation wash over her. She knew that the coming weeks and months would be the most dangerous and challenging of her life. But she also knew that she was ready for whatever lay ahead. She had found her purpose, and she would fight for it with every ounce of strength and courage she possessed. The Zorgians had taken everything from her: her home, her family, her freedom. But they could never take away her spirit or her will to resist. With a sense of grim determination, Arya closed her eyes and drifted off to sleep, dreaming of a future where her world was free once more. The Resistance had been planning their first major attack for weeks, and Arya could feel the tension in the air as they made their final preparations. The target was a heavily guarded Zorgian supply depot on the outskirts of the city, a facility that was critical to the aliens' ability to maintain control over the colony. Arya and her fellow resistance fighters had spent hours studying the depot's layout and security measures, looking for any weaknesses that they could exploit. They had finally settled on a plan: a daring nighttime raid that would rely on speed, surprise, and a healthy dose of luck. As the sun set on the evening of the raid, Arya found herself crouched in the shadows outside the depot's perimeter fence, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and adrenaline. Beside her, Marcus and the other members of her strike team were making their final checks on their weapons and equipment. "Remember the plan," Marcus whispered as they prepared to move out. "We hit hard and fast, destroy as much of the depot as we can, and then get out before the Zorgians can mount a counterattack." Arya nodded, her grip tightening on her rifle. She knew that the success of the entire operation rested on their ability to neutralize the depot's defenses and destroy its supplies. If they failed, the Zorgians would be able to continue their stranglehold on the colony, and the Resistance would be dealt a crushing blow. As the signal was given, Arya and her team began their infiltration of the depot. They moved silently through the shadows, using the cover of darkness to avoid detection by the Zorgian guards. Arya could feel her heart pounding in her chest as they made their way deeper into the facility, the sound of alien voices and machinery growing louder with each step. Suddenly, all hell broke loose. One of the guards had spotted them, and the depot was quickly filled with the sound of alarms and gunfire. Arya and her team sprang into action, firing their weapons at the Zorgian defenders and racing towards their objective. The fighting was intense and chaotic, with bullets and energy blasts flying in every direction. Arya could feel the heat of the explosions as she and her team fought their way through the depot, destroying everything in their path. The Zorgians were putting up a fierce resistance, but the humans were fueled by a desperate, unyielding determination. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of fighting, Arya and her team reached the depot's central supply room. They quickly set their charges and raced out of the building, just as the entire facility erupted in a massive fireball. As they made their escape into the night, Arya couldn't help but feel a sense of exhilaration wash over her. They had done it. They had struck a blow against the Zorgians and shown that the Resistance was a force to be reckoned with. But even as she celebrated their victory, Arya knew that this was only the beginning. The Zorgians would not take this attack lying down, and the Resistance would need to be ready for their retaliation. As she made her way back to the Resistance hideout with her team, Arya couldn't shake the feeling that they had just kicked a hornet's nest. The real battle was still to come, and she knew that it would take every ounce of courage and determination that the human spirit could muster to prevail. But for now, at least, they had shown the Zorgians that they were not afraid, and that they would never stop fighting for their freedom. And that, Arya knew, was a victory worth celebrating. The Zorgians' response to the Resistance's attack on the supply depot was as swift as it was brutal. Within hours of the raid, The aliens had launched a massive crackdown on the human population, rounding up anyone suspected of having ties to the resistance and subjecting them to harsh interrogation and punishment. Arya and her fellow resistance fighters were forced to go into hiding, moving from one safe house to another as they tried to stay one step ahead of the Zorgian patrols. The stress and fear of constant pursuit began to take its toll on the group, with tempers flaring and morale plummeting. But even in the midst of the chaos and despair, Arya remained determined to keep fighting. She knew that the resistance could not afford to back down now, not when they had finally begun to make progress in their struggle against the Zorgians. As the weeks passed and the crackdown showed no signs of abating, Arya and Marcus began to plan their next move. They knew that they needed to strike again, to show the Zorgians that the resistance was still a force to be reckoned with. But this time they needed to do more than just destroy a single supply depot. They needed to strike at the heart of the Zorgian occupation, to hit them where it would hurt the most. And so Arya and Marcus began to plan their most ambitious attack, yet a daring raid on the Zorgian headquarters in the heart of the colony's capital city. They knew that it would be a risky operation, with the odds stacked heavily against them. The Zorgian headquarters was one of the most heavily guarded buildings on the planet, with layers upon layers of security and defenses. But Arya and Marcus also knew that if they could pull it off, it would be a game changer. It would show the Zorgians that nowhere was safe from the resistance, and that the human spirit could not be crushed by fear and oppression. As they began to lay out their plans and gather their resources, Arya could feel a sense of excitement and purpose welling up inside of her. She knew that this was what she had been fighting for all along, the chance to strike a decisive blow against the Zorgians and bring hope to her people. But even as she threw herself into the planning and preparation, Arya couldn't shake the feeling that they were embarking on a mission from which there might be no return. The Zorgians would be expecting an attack, and they would be ready and waiting for the resistance. As she lay awake at night, staring up at the ceiling of their latest safe house, Arya tried to push those fears aside. She knew that there was no turning back now, and that the only way forward was through the fire and fury of the coming battle. And so, with a sense of grim determination, Arya steeled herself for the fight ahead. She knew that the road would be long and hard, and that the price of freedom would be paid in blood and sacrifice. But she also knew that it was a price worth paying, for herself, for her people, and for the future of her world. And with that knowledge burning in her heart, Arya closed her eyes and drifted off to sleep, dreaming of victory and a brighter tomorrow. As the resistance continued to strike at the Zorgians, word of their exploits began to spread throughout the colony and beyond. At first it was just whispers and rumors, passed from one human to another in secret meetings and hushed conversations. But as the attacks grew bolder and more daring, the stories began to take on a life of their own. The resistance fighters became legends, their names spoken with reverence and awe by the oppressed masses. Arya found herself at the center of this growing legend, her name and face becoming synonymous with the struggle for freedom. Everywhere she went, people looked to her with hope and admiration, seeing in her the embodiment of the human spirit's unbreakable will. At first, Arya was uncomfortable with the attention and adulation. She knew that she was just one fighter among many, and that the success of the resistance was due to the courage and sacrifice of all its members. But as the weeks turned into months and the legend of the resistance continued to grow, Arya began to understand the power of the stories that were being told about her and her comrades. She saw how those stories were giving hope to people who had long since given up, inspiring them to take up arms and join the fight against the Zorgians. And so, even as she continued to plan and execute daring raids against the aliens, Arya began to embrace her role as a symbol of the resistance. She gave speeches and interviews, using her platform to rally the human population and call for unity in the face of their common enemy. As word of the resistance's victories spread beyond the colony and into the wider galaxy, other human settlements began to take notice. They too had been suffering under the yoke of alien oppression, and the stories of Arya and her fellow fighters gave them the courage to rise up and fight back. Soon resistance cells began to spring up on other human colonies, each one inspired by the example of Arya and her comrades. The Zorgians found themselves facing a growing insurgency, with humans across the galaxy taking up arms against their alien overlords. Arya watched with pride as the resistance movement grew and spread, knowing that every new fighter was a step closer to victory. She knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult, and that many more lives would be lost before the final battle was won. But she also knew that the legend of the resistance had taken on a life of its own, and that it would continue to inspire and guide the human spirit long after she and her fellow fighters were gone. And so, with a sense of purpose and determination, Arya continued to lead the charge against the Zorgians, knowing that the fate of her world and her people rested on the strength and courage of the resistance. In the face of impossible odds and overwhelming adversity, the human spirit had proven itself unbreakable, and Arya knew that as long as that spirit lived on, there was hope for a brighter future. And with that knowledge burning in her heart, she pressed on, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, and to fight for the freedom and dignity of all humankind. The resistance had been planning their assault on the Zorgian headquarters for months, carefully gathering intelligence and stockpiling weapons and supplies. They knew that this would be the most difficult and dangerous mission they had ever undertaken, but they also knew that it was their best chance to strike a decisive blow against the aliens and turn the tide of the war. Arya stood at the front of the assembled fighters, her eyes blazing with determination as she surveyed the sea of faces before her. These were the men and women who had been with her from the beginning, the ones who had fought and bled and sacrificed everything for the cause of freedom. "My friends," she began, her voice ringing out clear and strong. "Today we stand on the brink of history. Today we have the chance to strike at the very heart of our enemy, to show them that the human spirit will never be broken, no matter how hard they try to crush us." A cheer went up from the assembled fighters, their voices rising in a defiant roar. Arya felt a surge of pride and love for these brave men and women, knowing that they would follow her into the very jaws of hell if she asked them to. "But make no mistake," she continued, her voice growing somber. "This will be the hardest fight of our lives. The Zorgians will be waiting for us, and they will not give up their power easily. Many of us may not survive to see the dawn of a new day." A hush fell over the crowd, the weight of Arya's words sinking in. They all knew the risks they were taking, the price they might have to pay for their freedom. "But I ask you this," Arya said, her voice rising once more. "Is there any price too high for the chance to live in a world where our children can grow up free from fear and oppression? Is there any sacrifice too great for the opportunity to build a better future for all humankind?" The answer came back in a resounding chorus of voices, each one filled with determination and resolve. "No," they cried, their fists raised in the air. "We will fight, and we will win." With those words ringing in their ears, the resistance fighters set out on their final mission. They struck hard and fast, catching the Zorgians off guard and breaching the perimeter of their heavily fortified headquarters. The battle that followed was fierce and bloody, with the resistance fighters facing wave after wave of Zorgian defenders. Arya was in the thick of the fighting, her rifle blazing as she led her troops forward, inch by hard-fought inch. The Zorgians fought back with all the firepower at their disposal, determined to crush the human insurgency once and for all. But the resistance fighters would not be denied, driven on by the knowledge that this was their one chance to break the chains of oppression and secure their freedom. In the end, it was Arya who struck the final blow, leading a small team of fighters deep into the heart of the Zorgian command center. There, they confronted the alien leadership, the ones who had orchestrated the occupation and the subjugation of the human race. The battle was short but brutal, with Arya and her team emerging victorious but battered and bloodied. As they stood over the fallen bodies of their alien oppressors, Arya felt a sense of triumph and relief wash over her. They had done it. Against all the odds, they had struck a decisive blow against the Zorgians and secured the future of their people. The road ahead would be long and difficult, with much rebuilding and healing to be done. But for now, in this moment, they had won. And as the news of their victory spread throughout the colony and beyond, Arya knew that the legend of the resistance would live on, inspiring future generations to fight for their freedom and their dignity, no matter the cost. For in the end, that was what it meant to be human, to stand up against tyranny and oppression, to fight for what was right, even in the face of impossible odds. And as long as that spirit lived on, Arya knew that there would always be hope for a better tomorrow. The fall of the Zorgian headquarters sent shockwaves throughout the colony and beyond. News of the Resistance's victory spread like wildfire, sparking hope and jubilation among the oppressed human populations across the galaxy. In the days and weeks that followed, the Zorgian occupation crumbled, their forces retreating in disarray as they struggled to regroup in the face of the emboldened human insurgency. The resistance fighters, led by Arya and her battle-hardened veterans, pressed their advantage, liberating one settlement after another and welcoming the newly freed humans into their ranks. As the Zorgians were driven back, the true extent of their brutality and oppression became clear. The human colonists emerged from their years of subjugation, blinking in the unfamiliar light of freedom, their bodies and spirits battered but unbroken. Arya found herself at the center of the liberation efforts, working tirelessly to coordinate the reconstruction and rehabilitation of the colony. She and her fellow leaders worked to establish a new government, one that would ensure the rights and freedoms of all humans and prevent the horrors of the occupation from ever happening again. It was a daunting task, but Arya was determined to see it through. She knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult, with many challenges and obstacles to overcome. But she also knew that the human spirit had proven itself stronger than any adversity, and that together they could build a better future for themselves and for generations to come. As the weeks turned into months, the colony began to heal and rebuild. The scars of the occupation would never fully fade, but the humans who had survived it emerged stronger and more united than ever before. And at the center of it all was Arya, the woman who had become a legend, the symbol of hope and resistance that had inspired a galaxy to rise up against their oppressors. She knew that her story would be told for generations, a testament to the unbreakable will of the human spirit. But for Arya, the true reward was not in the accolades or the fame, but in the knowledge that her people were finally free. She had fought and bled and sacrificed everything for this moment, and now, as she looked out over the rebuilt streets of her home, she knew that it had all been worth it. And so, as the sun rose on a new day and a new era for the colony, Arya stood tall and proud, ready to face whatever challenges the future might bring. For she knew that as long as the human spirit endured, there was nothing they could not overcome, no obstacle they could not surmount. The legend of the Resistance would live on, a beacon of hope and inspiration for all those who believed in the power of freedom and the indomitable will of the human race. And Arya would be there, always to lead the way and fight for what was right, no matter the cost. For that was what it meant to be human, to stand up against the darkness and the oppression, and to never, ever give up. And as long as there were those like Arya who were willing to fight for that ideal, there would always be hope for a better tomorrow. Thanks for watching this video. I hope you liked it. If you did, please be sure to leave it a like and subscribe too, if you don't want to miss our next one. Feel free to check out any of our other videos too.